Many Baptists.
What are you
Conference?
No, dead down.
No, I have to.
Dead
I
down.
have to have more.
You got the best hands.
James, who?
No.
I didn't hear about
Other than
He's
blind.
I remember.
Imagine that.
What are the qualifiers? Like,
I was just talking to you. It's a good one.
alright, what else? I know you're not just one.
Yeah, we're gonna do it.
I'm a really good interviewer.
I don't think this is okay.
Hey, someone wanna do my slides?
I got you.
I've been to
Do you know the timing on that one slide?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think.
Okay, so,
I believe.
if you're interested in applying, here's the QR code. Right here, please apply, we need more people to apply. Take my position, my place as secretary.
Harry Lee, Chair of Secretary.
It will be Harry Lee, chair of secretary, and chair of Neo-Orthodox theology.
All right. Stop standing.
What's the next sentence? Oh, book sale, 1st and 2nd of November, December. In the Commons, everybody likes books.
Yeah,
Alright, do I have any other?
No.
No? Alright, well, let's dig in.
It didn't go.
Oh, there it is. Oh. Alright, so tonight I'll be talking about the church and state. No, this is from Constantine to the Reformation. Please don't expect any contemporary historical analysis or commentary, but I will be drawing some conclusions that we can use. Oh, not yet. Okay. Sorry, it's okay. I totally misled you.
It's okay.
Okay, so I want us to keep in mind 3 ideas that we'll be tracing throughout this whole presentation. Dominion, legitimacy, and authority. Those are the 3 key ideas. So, after about 200 something years of persecution, the Christian church stood triumphant over its persecutors. With the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, and then by the successive edicts abolishing pagan practice and giving certain privileges to Christian clergy and such. Next slide, please. So this all changed when Constantine, my boy, saw this sign in heaven before a battle. And it said something like, by this, symbol or something, you'll have victory. You'll win.
By this sign you shall conquer.
By this sign you shall conquer. Thank you, Owen. I didn't put that on my notes because I knew Owen would know it. So Constantine sees that, he wins the battle, he gets converted. Boom, he's a Christian. This is crazy. 200 years of being persecuted, of being dogged on by the Romans, and saying, hey, why aren't you worshiping the Roman emperor? Is ended under Constantine. In 324 AD, Constantine unites the Roman Empire. In 325, Constantine famously calls the Council of Nicaea I to help unify and disperse any doctrinal divisions within the church. Because at this point, you have the Arians, were saying all these bad things, and you had the real Christians saying, hey, like, let's talk about this. Constantine exercised authority over the church by calling his council and by banishing the Arians. Yeah, he actually banished them, who didn't agree to the council. Admittedly, Constantine was motivated more by political things than by theological. And we can see this because Constantine wasn't really the best Christian. He wasn't baptized till later in life. And he was baptized by Mary. He had a few lapses. He was like, the Arians can come back, that's fine. And so theologically, Constantine wasn't this big, like, When Constantine changed the capital of Rome to Constantinople, he built churches, all this Christian architecture. He wanted to make it the Christian city. And then he also enacted a bunch of edicts of religious tolerance. Because he's a dog. Yeah. Thus Constantine marked the beginning of Christendom. He is the ideal of a Christian king for the next, however many centuries, really for the next millennia. And so all of the Christian kings are trying to be a type of this archetype of Constantine as a Christian king. Pretty much. Okay, next slide. I think. Yes. So, Christianity in Constantine's conversion didn't become the state religion until after Constantine, but it soon became expected that everyone was a Christian as early as the 2nd century in the Roman Empire. And this was because the state and religion are not separate in the minds of these people. The state always had a religion. This dichotomy of church and state that we have now did not exist in this time. Did not exist. And so there was kind of Christianity filled that vacuum. And there was lots of reasons for that. People were incentivized by Constantine to convert to Christianity. There were certain privileges that Christian clergy got. They were exempt from taxes, exempt from military service. Churches were exempt from taxes. The church got a lot of money. You can see people donating money, large donations, of gold and land, which you use to build hospitals and give alms, which is good. This is what the church did.
You can finish your sentence.
This is, good things. The church was getting all this money from rich people who were like, oh, I'm going to give money to the church because I want to. Augustine has this he goes on this little tangent, maybe I'll call it, about rich people who give inheritance that should go to their sons to the church instead of their heir. And Augustine is like, you shouldn't do that because you're disenfranchising your heir of what is his right, which is your property after you die.
When it says that everyone was expected to be a Christian, what is kind of the nature of that Christianity? What's the nature of that conversion? Is it kind of more of a socio-political conversion, or do you think it's something more legitimate? Because there was mass conversion, mass baptism kind of thing. And that could be, I guess, a group question, but I don't know.
I think at some point, the state, like you were expected to like be a Christian or to be a part of Roman society or Byzantine society. And that kind of motivated it. Like religion was very communal. And there was all this pressure from your family and the government to convert to Christianity and all these like benefits that come with it. Like we see an example in the Muslim conquest of the Levant and Upper Egypt. They capture Egypt and Palestine and all these places, and they're like, hey, you don't have to convert to be Muslim. Sometimes they would say, sometimes they would like kill you if you didn't convert. Sometimes they're like, hey, you can still be a Christian, but you have to pay these taxes. And you have to give us your like firstborn son or something for military service. But if you become a Muslim, you get all these things. And so that was a huge driver in conversion from Christianity, from really nominal Christianity in my view to Muslims. But that was kind of the answer to your question. I think it was more of like a social, cultural. Not to say that the majority of people couldn't or wouldn't have been real Christians and all that good stuff. But it's hard to say, especially if we see examples from missionaries going to the Balkans and Gaul and all these places. They go and they go to the king first, and the king's like, oh yeah, I'll be baptized. And then he orders everyone to be baptized, or everyone's expected to be baptized in this country and become Christian because the king became Christian. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Back to money. So this guy, John the almsgiver, cool guy, he gives alms. Alms are like gifts to the poor. He becomes patriarch in 606 AD of Alexandria. Alexandria is like really, really big Christian city. It is a patriarch. There was like 4 of them during that time. 5 of them during that time. Oh yeah, there's 5 of them. He becomes the patriarch, and he goes into the church treasury. He's like, oh, what's in here? And he finds 8,000 pounds of gold. Wow. How much do you think that's worth? 8,000 pounds of gold.
Probably like
In
today's money.
In today's money.
Trillion.
8 million. Or no, billion.
Is that you? You sounded so South African.
It is worth
Media.
estimated $220 million. So the church in Alexandria, just in Alexandria, is sitting on this fat stack of cash and gold. And there's also this story that John the almsgiver is given a gift of 10,000 pounds of gold. So that's like $300 million. And so the church at this point was definitely not poor. It had cash in this area. So the church went from being poor to being wealthy and able to support itself from donations, tithes, and even government aid. However, I think this is the next slide. Yes. With the improvement of external circumstances came the proportional degeneracy in moral character. So as the money increased, the bishops became more corrupt. People did not want to become clergy because it was a calling from God or whatnot. They wanted to become bishops and clergy because they wanted wealth and power. All these bad reasons. So let's have a brief discussion about kind of the relationship between these two things, like external circumstance and degeneracy of moral character. I want you to talk to someone next to you. One person next to you. Hurry. I'll go talk to Peter.
No.
One or two people.
One or two people next to you.
Holy Ghost. Who discussed, what is it?
That's unfair. I think if you like this, perhaps the external circumstances. I'd say probably goes to
Yeah. Except that they weren't. They just wanted to. Yeah, well.
Moral, might be a little more said.
Yeah, exactly.
Most levels.
You got quite like a clear straight line going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think like,
Yeah, like
with
there was
real
a
complicated conversation, kind of basically just like train up to push this one. Say it's bad. I'm sure it's never bad.
I heard it's being said, how much is it not? It's like $1.
Well, you get
Like bars.
especially if you don't combine those. Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I was trying to do the discussion.
Okay, we'll come back. I will take one comment from the crowd. Anything to say?
All the generosities is bad.
Yes, it is bad.
Like really.
Yeah. How does your dog?
Yes. We're talking about monasticism last week, right?
You guys like Monk Week?
Yeah.
Okay, we gotta keep moving. We have to. Okay, so John Chrysostom, my top G, remarks that those bishops and priests who like have a lot of money and land and whatnot meddle in things foreign to their office. And he mentions that the apostles, or uses the example of the apostles selling their property that was gifted to them and giving money to the poor and needy. It's good, which I think what John the almsgiver was doing pretty good. Okay, so the next idea, we talked about the economical state of the church. We're going to talk about like the legal protection that the church had against the state. So the church was largely protected against the secular courts. The bishops were given the power and the jurisdiction to judge ecclesial disputes brought to them by denying any right to appeal to a civil court. The judgment of the episcopal court was fine, but only extended to like deposing people from like clerical office and excommunication. The church was eventually given authority to handle criminal cases among its own clergy without the interference of civil authorities. This protected the church from any outside influence of the state. And as you can imagine, this allowed for a lot of corruption in the church as well. Like, oh, if my bishop or whoever is above me, is my friend, I can pretty much get away with whatever I want because I'm not going to be prosecuted for it. Because the civil authorities can't do anything. So they had this legal protection.
Do you think that this is something that was stemming from like a good faith idea of, looking at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians about breaking lawsuits against others in the church and wanting to honor that? Or do you think it was less reputable from the beginning?
I'm inclined to the good faith option. Just because I'm more optimistic about how some of these things came about. Like, the church wasn't going out seeking all this wealth. I don't think. They were being donated all this money in land to them. And they just were in this circumstance where they had all this crazy amounts of money. And that led to further problems. And I think in the same way, the legal protection here is the church saying, like, hey, let us handle our own stuff because 1 Corinthians, right? And it protected the church from a lot of stuff. From like tyrannical kings and whatnot. Okay, next. The clergy were given the right to intercede for criminals and prisoners. This is very exciting. If someone's imprisoned by a tyrannical guy, king, ruler, baron, count. If Count Dooku, maybe, he's a count, imprisons someone, the clergy can go and say, hey, like, you imprisoned this guy, but I don't think he really did it. I think he's innocent, blah, 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 blah. And so the clergy was given the right to intercede for that stuff. Another thing they were allowed to do was churches became places of asylum. So it's kind of like the sanctuary cities in the Old Testament. People could run there and like, oh, I promise I didn't mean to like kill this guy, or I didn't do it, but these guys are coming to hunt me down and kill me. They could run to churches, and once a year the bishop would come by, and the bishop would decide their case, like decide whether or not they were innocent and they could still be under the church's protection, or they're going to be kicked out and, the civil authorities handle it from there. The church was also allowed to exert influence over civil legislation. Okay?
Yeah, kind of more focused on the last point, but it could be also tying into what you might say now. Do you see any connection with Moses in that he's the spiritual leader of Israel, but he's also governing them as a body of a growing nation?
Like when the church exercises spiritual and temporal power like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, even in that circumstance, Moses still had Aaron. So in whatever spiritual aspect that Moses was playing into, Aaron was still more of a spiritual role. This is a good example of dominion, the church developing its dominion over its own land, over its own practices, over its own people. And the church starts exerting its influence on the civil authorities and laws. Okay. Constantine, going back to Constantine, my dog, wrote laws prohibiting crucifixion, gladiatorial games, and encouraged the emancipation of Christian slaves. In 534, Justinian released this big law, Codex Justinianus, which became the basis of all legal documents in Europe for like 1,000 years. It's pretty cool. And that had huge Christian influence. Okay, so at this point, we're like 8th century. Yeah, 8th century. The church and the state are different, but codependent upon each other. You know,
So if they're codependent, what gave the church protection from the secular courts?
the church came to an agreement, like the church and state, I guess, came to an agreement.
Also, this is Christendom, at this point, it's Christendom. So there wasn't really such thing as a secular court in the mind of the Christians at the time. So even like going to a state, a quote unquote state sponsored court would still be under the jurisdiction of the church. So that's kind of what codependence is getting at. Like, they're all Christians, so to speak.
Yeah, and maybe a better word would be civil court. I think like a judge over, like a judge in the city, like a civil judge, presides over the civil and criminal cases of lay people in that particular area. While the clergy deals, the clergy only has the right to deal with stuff within the church, like only between involves clergy.
Do you think the way in the nature that Christianity became like the big thing for Rome? Do you think that you were talking about this, but would you? I mean, it did a lot of good, but do you think also at the same time to create a lot of just like Christian, like cultural Christians? Like, I mean, every church you could say like has those people, but like, do you think for the majority were, or is it hard to say?
This is kind of going back to Trent's question, I think. I think there was a lot of cultural Christianity, but I also don't want to discount that a lot of them could, or really, they should, and like had real faith. In that sense. I don't know, I'm not like true Christians instead of like cultural, just cultural Christians. Okay, next slide, please. Ooh, we're on to medieval Christianity. This is stolen from Papillon, I think. The legitimizing popes. And the Franks are the French, by the way. Next slide. So, Rome at this point calls upon Pippin the Short. He's a Frankish king. And because in the 8th century, Rome was being threatened by the Arian Lombards. Ooh. Not the suburb, whatever, but in Italy. And rather than turning to Byzantium, which was the top dog at that time in the East, they're like, we don't want to be under them. So they call Pippin the Short, and he's like, Pope Zacharias. He's like, Pippin, please come help. We're under attack from these pagan Lombards. And Pippin comes and he's like, yeah, I got you. He repels the Lombards. Everyone's happy. And so Pope Zacharias is so happy that he anoints Pippin like king of the Franks, and he gives him the title Patrician of the Romans, which implies this like protectorate over the Roman Church and civil authority over the church's territory. this is a good example of the Pope giving legitimacy to rulers and kings, and for the church relying on the state to do things. If you remember the story of Pippin the Short, he was like he wasn't a co-regent, but he basically ran the entire country for this other monarch guy who was just like a shadow monarch. And so the Pope helped Pippin like actually become king of France.
Shadow applications.
All right, so Stephen III, again, the Lombards attack, and Pope Stephen III is like, oh, Pippin, the Lombards attacking again, please help. And he's like, Pippin, please take back all this land that the Lombards took. And Pippin comes down, and he's like, okay. But Pippin, at this point, promises the church would protect his dynasty against his rivals by use of excommunication. They're very excited. So the Pope is like, hey, Pippin, like if you're worried about your dynasty and your heirs, don't worry about it. Anyone who opposes them, I'll just excommunicate them. You know? And so he goes down, handles it, he gives the Pope the land. And then this happens a third time. Bless their hearts. You know, third time's a charm. The Lombards attack. And I think it is still Stephen III. Who's like, hey, Pippin, you know how you came those other 2 times? This time, I'm going to promise you a long life and the most glorious mansions in heaven if you come and help. Like, isn't that a sick deal? Like, if you come do this, like, I'll hook you up in heaven.
Like that.
So Pippin comes down a third time, and he takes the land, and this is very important. He gives these lands to the Pope, and this is called the donation of Pippin. How'd they name it? Ooh, good questions, guys. This can also be referred under the pseudonym, which is like a false name, pretty much. The donation of Constantine. Because looking back, the Catholic Church was like, well, you know, we didn't just give these lands from Pippin, but we actually got them from Constantine, the emperor.
There was a forged letter that they used. They didn't know it was forged at the time.
Yeah.
Someone knew it was forged.
Someone knew it was false.
We don't really know who knew it was forged and who wasn't, but that was used to legitimize them calling this the donation of Constantine.
Yeah, and it's because they wanted to seem more legitimate in owning like the papal states. Like the Pope owned all this land in Italy. It was kind of crazy. Okay, next slide, please. Ah, yes. So Pippin's son, Charlemagne, was crowned, I forget what he did, but on Christmas Day, 1800 AD, he was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Leo III. I still didn't change the in here. I saw that earlier. And this was the Pope's like, oh, we're finally independent of Byzantium. Charlemagne's our new king, whatnot. But this really shows and somewhat establishes the Pope's authority to crown and by implication discrown kings and give them like legitimacy, and the Pope has authority to do these things. Yeah.
Did you find any link in like the even Saul, but also like the Davidic kingdom of like spiritual leaders that could own other or like more political leaders? Does that make sense?
Can you give it to me one more time?
Well, in the time of Solomon, specifically, there's a temple with the high priest and the priesthood. And then there's King Solomon. Is there an example somewhere in scripture, or if not, then there isn't. But if there is, did you find anything about like King Solomon and the high priest maybe working together, or even just the high priest having something to do with the election of the king, whether it be of Israel or if it's outside of Israel? Does that not make sense though?
I mean, like the election.
Yeah.
I mean, there was definitely some like. Do you have an answer to that, Trey?
I could try to talk about some passages. Yeah, so I mean, there's like the prophetic anointing, right? Of course, everybody saw that as something from God. The prophet was more or less irrelevant himself, I think, to that. You know, like Samuel.
Yeah.
For Saul and for David.
Yeah.
And then you see, and the prophetic office is pretty highly valuable to the king, like Nathan, rebuking David, right? Or Hezekiah asking Isaiah to help him out.
Yeah.
But then you also see like when Jeroboam the first revolts, he like imposes new priests with a new high priest.
Yeah.
Right, of his own.
Yeah.
Which, of course, that's a false reiteration of the true kingdom and a perversion of the system, but at least in their view, it might have been possible for the king to exercise that authority. And then I don't know if the high priest had that same kind of authority in the king's life as the prophets did, but it kind of seems like, you know, David and Saul, I guess, are some of the first kings, and then Hezekiah is one of the last ones. So,
Okay.
I don't know. That's just what came to mind.
There's also that story. There was one king, like, his entire family gets killed. But, like, I'm pretty sure it's the priest, or the high priest, who hides him, like, away, and he saves his life. I can't remember which king it is. It may have been Asa. Started really young.
Oh, was it one of Solomon's sons that they went and hid in Egypt? Possibly.
Maybe.
Okay. Sorry.
This was much later. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyways, back to Charlemagne. So, yeah, Charlemagne is honestly like top dog. He's like so cool. Now, even though Charlemagne like bows to this authority of the Pope, he is like so powerful and has so much gravitas that he's still just like, he can pretty much do almost whatever he wants. And so he still has control, or some control, over the churches within his territory, appointing bishops and even calling some councils in the church. Right, J2? Yeah. J2 is what I'm So,
Question. Which councils did he,
that's a great question. This is a question I'm not prepared for.
One of the big councils that he calls is Front Court, which is held after Nicaea II. So Nicaea II was held in the East near Constantinople, and it declares that images are to be given honor, and that the honor given to the image passes to the thing which the image represents. And so in Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, I believe it's Charlemagne, calls a council of Frankfurt that essentially says, no, we should not be doing this. We shouldn't be venerating images in that way. But he wanted to avoid the opposite problem, which was iconoclasm, saying images are evil and must all be destroyed. So I kind of like the Council of Frankfurt, but I think that was an example where he didn't like the excesses of either council, but he was able to retain a Greek Christology. But anyway, that's one of them. And that was a big deal in the West for a while, from what I understand, or at least in Germany.
I don't. There is examples later of Charlemagne's successors. When the Pope is being bad and naughty, the Holy Roman Emperor comes down and is like, hey, you're not gonna be Pope anymore. Sorry, bud. And he installs a new Pope. I think that's later. So eventually, not yet. Eventually, the bishops, because all the land donations, they owned so much that they became vassals to the emperor in the land. So not only are these bishops like sworn to the Pope and all that stuff, they also have to swear like loyalty to this civil governor, this civil authority. This is important. Okay, next slide. So Charlemagne, you could say, holds the both stately civil power, which is represented by the number 6, which is the number of humanness and incompletion. But he also holds kind of the church in his hands, and the power, some power over the church, which is represented by the number 7. Yes.
Oh my.
Yes. Did you get that?
Figure snap.
Okay, next slide. Yeah, I have to kind of like coax through these things. Next slide.
So 16 slides.
So, the Crusades is a good example. Pope Urban II is like, oh no, the Muslims are desecrating, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and all these holy lands. Let's try to take it back and show those Muslims, what we got. That's like a very abbreviated good church of the whole thing. The First Crusade, they did capture Jerusalem, I think. And a lot of other stuff. Next slide, please. Almost every crusade was called or blessed by a pope. So this shows the authority the popes have to make the civil kings or the kings do what they want them to do. Like they go around and the Pope basically bosses around some Holy Roman emperors are like, hey, you have to do this or I'm going to excommunicate you. In fact, one Holy Roman emperor was like excommunicated like 3 or 4 times because he kept leaving the Holy Land and not defending it and going back. Pope Innocent III offered money and full indulgences to anyone who wanted to participate in the 5th Crusade. It's kind of important. So like he was bribed. Next slide, please. It's a joint effort, Yeah, so you see like this 2-sword idea, where like both of the swords are under the authority and the guidance of God, and the church is saying like to the spiritual sword is saying to the temporal sword, like, hey, you should go do this, and they're expected to go and crusade because it's God's will. If you ever seen the movie Kingdom of Heaven, right? Their chance is, God wills it, is to go and kill people. Next slide. And then the Inquisition. Nobody expects this Inquisition. So the Inquisition was another way in which the Roman Catholic Church exercised its authority over people. And it was a way of repressing heresy. Charles Wade has an interesting comment to say right now about heresy.
So by this point in the church's history, heresy had been redefined from something that removed you from the bounds of dogmatic theology to you saying anything that the church didn't like, or anything that saying anything against any doctrine of the church that has been declared dogmatically whatsoever. So it was no longer a very specific thing like Arianism, which is a heresy because it rejects the nature of Christ and therefore the gospel. It could be like, hey, something that will be relevant in the Reformation era. Hey, don't sell indulgences. Indulgences are bad. That was a heresy. And that was able to be called a heresy because during this time they had redefined it to the point that if you say anything or do anything that the Pope doesn't like, him or his cardinal cronies can declare you a heretic and have you excommunicated and burned at the stake. So it's a repressing heresy that becomes like a very, very huge umbrella term for just anything that the Pope or his men did not like it.
I'm being refreshed. What do you next you think? Thank you, Charles Wade. So the church would excommunicate people, then they would be like, oh, but we don't have the power to kill anyone. We don't kill anyone. But then the state would go and execute them. Like right after, it was pretty crazy. Priests were actually forbidden to pronounce the death penalty. Next slide. I think that was in one of the Lateran councils that decided that. So the church also expected kings and princes to repress heresy and even held them responsible for doing so by punishing them if any heretical movement started in their territory. They get this kind of historical precedent from Constantine banishing the Arians after Nicaea 1, right? And then after the 12th century, councils advocate for the death penalty for pretty much all heretics. Pretty crazy. Next slide, please. What is this? So we're moving to another specific example of Gregory VII and the investiture controversy. So during the 11th century AD, the church owned, this is probably an exaggeration, as much as half his land in some countries. It was probably less than a third, split between all of them. But this goes back to the idea that the bishops were often made vassals of kings. And so the kings would be like, hey, I'm just going to appoint bishops because they're my vassals. And so the kings would start doing that. And a notorious culprit was Henry IV, who was doing it. He also did a few other things. But Gregory VII forbidden it. Henry IV tried to depose the Pope. He sends this guy to Rome, and the Pope's like having this council meeting, and there's like 100 bishops there. And the guy comes in and is like, hey, this guy's not the Pope anymore. Henry IV says so, blah, 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 blah. You can, eat worms. Yeah, Peter?
I'm assuming Gregory VII is the Pope and Henry IV is the King of England?
Yeah.
Right.
No, France. No, he's the Holy Roman Emperor.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah, sorry. Henry IV is the Holy Roman Emperor.
Okay.
So this guy comes in, and then all the bishops try to murder this guy who says this. They're like, oh, we're going to beat you to death. But Gregory VII's like, no, stop it. Don't do it. And he protects this guy. And then the next day, the Pope excommunicates Henry IV and says, all of your subjects that you have, King, Emperor, Henry IV, yeah, they don't have to listen to you anymore. They're free of all their oaths of loyalty. And they like set a date of when this would take place, like when their oaths would be like dissolved. And so Henry finally is like, I guess I gotta, submit to the Pope again. And so he walks barefoot to this castle in the Alps, I'm pretty sure. And he's like groveling outside where the Pope is at for 3 days in the winter. Outside. He makes probably the most powerful temporally powerful man in Europe wait outside this castle for 3 days in the winter. And then the Pope finally has mercy on him and lets him in and says, oh, okay, you're back in the church. Crazy story, in my opinion. So this is like the peak and pinnacle of papal power. Next slide, please. Which brings us to the papal triple crown. So this bad boy, I'm pretty sure this started with Gregory VII. So the first crown represents the absolute spiritual authority the Pope has over like everywhere. The second crown represents temporal power over the papal states, which you're about to see now. The third crown represents sovereignty over all earthly rulers and governments.
Interesting. How confidently is that true? Because I know that it didn't started with one and then the Pope
Yeah.
added another one.
It went,
And then,
I'm pretty sure it finally reached 3 with Gregory.
but is that like why they added it specifically? Or is this just after the fact that there were 3 that this is now linked to? Because of
I'm pretty
the-
sure they added the third one for
They
this.
added it specifically for that, yeah.
Oh, okay. So this was like,
Yeah,
What
the meaning,
Yeah,
the
one
meaning
thing
is
to represent.
intrinsic to the crown.
okay.
It doesn't-
yeah. So this is pretty crazy. But the popes don't wear this anymore. Like Francis and Leo don't wear it. They wear something else. Okay, next slide. Please. Yeah, here's the extent of the papal states.
Oh.
Pretty much like from the 15th century until like the 19th. So they owned all this land.
Wasn't it a lot bigger? Like even to France, is covering quite a bit.
They had
Western-
a few stuff in Avignon.
Okay. Before this time, 1850.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So then, the powerful princes pushed popes to the pinnacle of Pope sanity, the fall of papal authority. Can you read this? Do you want me to read this for you?
Read it for me.
This guy's saying, listen, Rudy. I use 2 swords now. One used to be enough, but now I don't feel right without 2. That's Pope Boniface thinking. I have no idea. I just searched up, I just found it on Google Images. Next slide, please. So, Philip the Fair and the independence of the state. So, Philip the Fair was king of France. He was kind of like he was the beginnings of an absolute monarch in France. Philip was appointing bishops and taxing the clergy, which was a big no-no. So Boniface, represented by this guy, the Chad with the triple crown, Boniface is like, how shall we assume to judge kings and princes and not dare to proceed against a worm? Let them perish forever, that they may understand that the name of the Roman pontiff is known in all the earth, and that he alone, I, most high over princes. Boniface VIII says this, not without historical precedent. Remember Gregory VII, right? Gregory VII is like, yo, Henry, you gotta do this. And Henry actually does it. One of the most powerful men in Europe grovels outside of the castle 3 days in the winter. And so Boniface VIII is like, yeah, I can totally do the same thing. The Pope has temporal authority over all earthly princes and powers. So the French Parliament eventually is on Philip's side, and the French Parliament is like, yeah, Philip, you're not really under the church anymore. You can kind of do whatever you want. And then Boniface VIII drops the diss tract Unum Sanctum here, which is like, whoever doesn't submit to the Roman pontiff is like not saved. It's pretty much what it says. And it's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Shout out SDS Chapel announcement video.
Shout out to Chapel. Do I have another slide on this? The next one? Yeah, here we go. Do you like how it changes format every time? Keep you on your toes. So Boniface he eventually loses this fight with Philip, and Boniface is like so depressed that he like just dies afterwards. It's kind of sad. So Philip comes and takes the popes to France and starts the Avignon papacy. And so after this point, the popes were essentially subject to the French king. Pretty crazy. And then you get some dissatisfaction with the papacy. William of Ockham.
Those guys are always.
So that what?
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Who argues that the Pope should only have spiritual authority and not temporal authority. Which, he was probably right to say that. This is also a time of shifting from an absolute church to an absolute state. The church, up to this point, held the supreme power over the lives of millions of European people. From the affairs of an empire to the state of men's souls after they died. It had the perceived authority to call anathemas upon anyone who questions his power. It had the ability to call down interdicts or prohibitions on burials and certain church ceremonies. Its clergy were beyond the reach of civil authority. It controlled the schools, it controlled the hospitals, it controlled major centers of learning up to this point. The church reached into the very personal aspects of everyone's lives. Again, look at the example of Henry IV. The Pope made him grovel for 3 days outside. And then, again, look at the power that defied the Holy Roman Emperor's written and sealed protection of John Huss to come, be heard in front of everyone. The church defied that and burnt him at the stake in front of the Holy Roman Emperor. Which admittedly the emperor was probably wanting to do that anyways. The church, in my estimation, had ultimate absolute authority over the lives of these Europeans up until the weakening of nationalism, which we see with Philip the Fair, and this development of distinct national identities, moving people away from their Christian identity as from a purely Christian identity. It was also further weakened by the increase of more secular learning or more learning in general in Europe, and the spread of certain ideas. Okay, and so this like weakens papal authority, and this is like one instance of that. Like the Pope, he like loses a lot of his authority. Next slide. Ooh, the Reformation of the state. Liberty and justice for all. Yay. Okay, next slide. So I don't really have a lot of Luther or Calvin, but so Luther basically says that the state is divinely ordained and that every person is bound to obey the state. But the state also has some boundaries to just the temporal realm. Like the state does not have any jurisdiction over spiritual matters of the church. The state can pass legislation, enforcing laws, protecting property, preserving order, look after the poor, and punish the wicked. This is what Luther thought that the state should do. Next slide. Calvin, on the state, he kind of held this like two swords thing, I think. He like had a temporal sword. The authority of rulers comes from God, not the Pope. This is a important idea because remember back in the previous presentation, leading this presentation, that the Pope was giving legitimacy and authority to these kings by crowning them, taking their crowns off, saying, you can't be king anymore unless I say you can. But Luther is saying that the Pope does not have this authority, only God does. And so the rulers, the king's authority comes from God. Calvin also says that kings should also be obeyed even when tyrannical, because they are God's instrument of order. Yeah, I mean, if you look at Romans 13, which I have at the end, actually. Actually, can you flip to the last slide, please? It's like, this was written in a time when the church was being persecuted by the state. When the king, the emperor, was tyrannical. And so Calvin looks at this and he's like, what do you mean you have the right to disobey the king if he's, being bad? It's still God's authority. We'll read that later. But they can be disobeyed if they contradict God's word, God's law, all this stuff. So it gives certain exceptions. But he also, I think this is the next slide.
Pretty.
Thank you. Calvin insists that only lower level positions in government can protest or depose kings. So that would be like a senator or a governor are the only ones who can impeach the president now. That might be a good equivalent. Instead of anyone being able to, everyone should be in submission to the government, while only people in the government can protest or dispose. I don't know, it's an interesting idea. Calvin was kind of middle of the road, in my opinion. He was not a supporter of democracy, but he set into motion the consolidation of personal liberty and the establishment of democracy. He was a good American. Some say he was the first American. Yeah, really? Who's ever said that? Calvin says absolute monarchy leads to tyranny, while democracy leads to confusion. So Calvin advocates for a mixed government that limits the power of the monarch and protects the freedom of the people. So this thing right here is important, because this is kind of a good point to see the beginnings religious liberty in Europe. All these Protestant princes get together and like, hey, we're going to protect ourselves from Charles V bullying us into being Catholic again. Like, we're going to stand up for ourselves. And so they form this league. In order to be a member, you have to be in agreement with the Augsburg Confession. So these were the Lutherans. This also led to the principle of whose realm is religion, meaning that someone's religion is still tied to their locality, to the country he was in. Like if you were in any of this purple area, you had to be Lutheran.
Yay.
If you were anywhere else, you were expected to be a Catholic. And you were like still going to be persecuted if you were in here in a Protestant or in here as a Catholic. But this is the beginning of like religious liberty. I think that would be important to point out. Another huge development in religious liberty is the translation of the Bible into the vernacular. Again, the German Bible, the English Bible, these all contributed to like an individual sense of like religious liberty. If that's understood. So, you look back, we draw a few concluding statements, right, J2? We've looked at the dominion, all these examples, and I want you to think and tell me, how have we seen aspects of dominion, legitimacy, and authority from all these events? We've seen aspects of all three of them all throughout this presentation. We see the rise and fall of papal authority. We see the rise of religious liberty in Europe. And I think Calvin's kind of idea of this middle of the way big stance towards government, where an absolute monarch who has all the power and no accountability to people below him is bad. Like that's when you get like dictators who do whatever they want, you know. And there's a lot of instances of popes acting that way. Tyrannical dictators, because they had all this spiritual authority and all this stuff. But you also don't want to go all the way the opposite direction. Like maybe the Anabaptists might be a good example. Maybe the Puritans might be also a good example of like separatism and more like democracy and all this stuff. Calvin doesn't advocate for that. He still thinks there should be leaders in positions who like rule and who can make decisions, informed, good decisions, and be responsible. Do you have any questions? Friends might be. This might go for me. I will take any questions now that you have. Yes, you do.
So you're talking about how whose realm is religion, that whole concept. What caused Protestants to be more like you have to be Lutheran or Catholic, or possible to like cause the government to not want people to trust?
I mean, if you remember, the Holy Roman Empire is Catholic. Every pretty much to be considered a Christian up to this point in Europe, you had to be Roman Catholic. And so the emperor was expecting everyone, all of his subjects, to be Roman Catholic. And they view Protestants as heretics. I know, crazy, right? And so they're like, we don't want our subjects to be heretics. And the Pope is expecting princes and kings to like repress and fight against heresy. There's examples of kings, like the King of France, going and killing all these people who were heretics because the Pope told them to. And so the Holy Roman Emperor had this expectation that he had to do it because these were heretics. And that kind of mindset was still in the Protestants' mind as well. Like all of my subjects should be Protestant because this is a Protestant country. And blah, 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 blah.
So how early on were the Protestants like, okay, this is heretical? When were people like, okay, this is an official like denomination?
The Protestants.
Yeah, but when was the first like time like the Protestants like, because they were oppressed for a while because like you'd be Lutheran or Catholic, but then when were they first like Lutheran? I mean, yeah, but like they're kind of called heretical.
Oh, when they
Yeah,
were
once they were
finding like
once they called heretical, when were they not heretical?
like stop being heretical by
Yeah.
So after this, they have like this 30 years war type deal where like millions of people in Europe die fighting this war over religion. And it ends in what's called the Peace of Westphalia, which is marked by a lot of scholars as being like the beginning of separation of church and state. Because it's a treaty that says that you're no longer allowed to go and kill people because they're, Protestant or Catholic. And that was like 6th, 17th century. Oh, sorry, Scott was first, I'm sorry, unless you were responding to us.
I was just gonna say, the Council of Trent is largely impacted by all of these debates as well, because Charles V still wants Protestant involvement in the Council of Trent. And the Pope also, depending on which Pope, kind of also wants Protestant involvement, but to a limited degree. So all of these debates also heavily impacted the way the Council of Trent was carried out. Because Holy Roman Emperors kept starting wars trying to kill Protestants. And the Pope kept doing the same thing. But then the vassal kings who wanted to be Protestant were arguing back and forth with them as well, getting into more small wars after the 30 Years' War. So all of this church and state conflict ends up impacting Roman Catholic doctrine and the way that Trent is done and formulated.
I have a couple questions. I can also talk to you after. So, I guess like this, I'll ask you that now. What do you think? Never mind. I'll ask both of them after. Okay.
I was just gonna say, like, it wasn't so much that the Catholics like stopped saying, you're heretics. Like with Trent, they doubled down on that. You know what I mean? Like they still condemn the Protestants as heretics, right? But with the Peace of Westphalia and kind of the separation of church and state, the condemnation of heretic didn't come with like a political like with a temporal punishment, because it couldn't. And the Protestants didn't like the Catholics so much, but I think that they, having kind of recovered some core central doctrines, were able to look a little bit more favorably on the Catholics than the Catholics did on the Protestants. So like the Protestants weren't really doing a whole lot of anathematizing or anything like that. But like Griffin said, they weren't really able to punish each other so much. But yeah, I guess there was a lot of tension here. Like you said, 30 Years' War, there's you'll learn about in HWC something called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. I think that's what that's called.
Yeah.
Where it's just like Catholics came in and just like slaughtered thousands of Protestants like overnight. And he was like, okay, guys, maybe you just stay out of our space. And everybody was like, that's a good idea. And then, yeah, but that was all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's a good example of St. Bartholomew Day Massacre. And that happened like, in Paris, somewhere in France, where like Catholics are like, no, French should be Catholic. Go kill all these French Protestants. And so, like, we gripe and complain about the separation of church and state in America, sometimes for legitimate reasons, but like when we look back at how painful and how like devastating like the state's and its moral powers intervention in spiritual affairs have been, where millions of people died, there's a reason why we have that separation of power. Alright, last line. And I just wanted to end with Romans 13. This is like a classic passage. Mission to oh. I don't know what revenue. No, don't change it. Don't change it. Okay, can I ask someone to read this for me?
Let every person be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. I think I see what you're doing.
Oh, that's where it came from. Thank you. All right. Well, that's my presentation. I will now pray very righteously. Lord God, thank you for the opportunity to learn more about you and your church, Lord. We thank you for your hand of provision and guidance and providence over us, Lord, and over our family, over our fathers and mothers who have gone before us, who have learned all these very important lessons, Lord, that we get to learn about, we get to learn from. I pray, Lord, that you would help us live as Christians in our time and in our age, and help us to respond to these great questions, Lord, that are difficult questions that we are seeking answers for. I pray that you would help us and bless us in our studies and give us strength, Lord. In your precious and holy name we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Sign up to be in the shadow.
Yeah, if you want to do this, do that.
Join STS if you want to replace Griffin.
Yeah, so basically,
If you want to see Griffin gone.
Fill out the form.
if I get 100 applications, I'll drop out of school.
You're gonna drop out of school?
If I get 100 applications.
Yeah,
Matt, roll your chair. Matt, let's start.